So I guess we don't like Tears of the Kingdom now. It seems like everybody's switching up on this game, and I don't really understand what happened. Hello there, everyone. Welcome back to the channel. So the other day, I tweeted out something that got a little bit more attention than I expected. I tweeted out that I had been seeing a lot of people saying that Breath of the Wild has a better story than Tears of the Kingdom, but it actually goes a lot further than that. I've been seeing a lot of people say that Breath of the Wild is a better game than Tears of the Kingdom, and throughout this video, I want to make it very clear that I love Breath of the Wild, and I don't want to discredit what it did for Zelda as a franchise, and I totally understand that without Breath of the Wild, Tears of the Kingdom couldn't happen, but to me, I've been seeing so many people just switching on this game, going back on what they were saying, and saying it's actually worse than Breath of the Wild, saying it's not that great, it's like a 7 out of 10, and I've never seen more of a crazy backpedal in terms of opinions on a game. I'm sure there are other examples of this, but this is definitely the hot one right now in the year of 2023, so I wanted to talk about this because I've seen so many people saying that Breath of the Wild is a better game, especially in terms of story, which we'll talk about. I just don't understand. Listen, I get it. There's a honeymoon phase for every game. And, you know, I said Tears of the Kingdom was like a perfect 10 out of 10 masterpiece when it came out. And I still think it's the best Zelda game. Right there with Wind Waker. I always put it right there with Wind Waker, of course, in terms of other 3D Zeldas. Of course, A Link Between Worlds is my favorite 2D Zelda game, right there with Minish Cap. But Tears of the Kingdom this is all subjective. So I don't want to say it's objectively better than Breath of the Wild, but I really don't know how you could look at Breath of the Wild and think that it's better than Tears of the Kingdom. I get it, time and place, it was more impactful when it released, but Tears of the Kingdom is pretty clearly a better game. So let's start by talking about the story a little bit, and I more so want to talk about the story structure. Breath of the Wild was completely lambasted in 2017 for its story, for the way it told its story, for the lack of Zelda's importance in the story, for the lack of really anything happening in modern-day Hyrule. That is like the main complaint with that game, right up there with Divine Beast. People hated the story in that game, and now people are saying it's better than the story in Tears of the Kingdom, which is just crazy to me, because I think the story in Tears of the Kingdom is one of the best stories in it's better than a lot of Zelda games. Of course, Skyward Sword will always be number one, and Twilight Princess and Wind Waker up there as well, but I would say Tears of the Kingdom is definitely in the upper echelon of stories in a Zelda game. The actual story, what happens with the characters, what happens with Ganondorf, of course, and I mean, the final section of the game is incredible. I think it's probably one of the best final sequences of any Zelda game for sure. There were a lot of people replying to my tweet saying they just think that both stories are bad, and that's fine, but Tears of the Kingdom clearly has a better story than Breath of the Wild. It's really not even close. I also saw a lot of complaints in my little Twitter thread that they were fine with Tears of the Kingdom story, but their issue more came from the fact that it was told through memories again. I don't know, man. I will agree that letting you get the memories in any order was really dumb. I don't really know why they did that. They didn't need to do that. I get having like the hieroglyphs on the mountainsides and all that, having it align kind of with the actual event that happens in the flashback. I guess that was kind of cool, or at least that's what they were going for, but honestly, they should have just had it so that no matter what, even if you get a memory in the northeast region of the map or the northwest, whatever, it should have just been told in order. With Breath of the Wild, I mean, I feel like that was a little bit more understandable, but because the story in this game, Zelda just went back to the past, it felt like we were seeing what was happening with her a little bit more urgently than what was happening in the memories for Breath of the Wild, because we knew really what happened with Breath of the Wild from the start. It was like, okay, well, he fell into a coma for 100 years, he was put to sleep, and that's it. And then obviously there's different things they fill in there with the memories, but for the most part, we kind of knew what was happening. With Tears of the Kingdom, Zelda is currently in the present at the start of the game, and then gets sent back to the past. So inherently, those memories and seeing those cutscenes is more interesting than the memories from Breath of the Wild. I don't know if that makes sense. Once again, I agree that being able to do them out of order is really stupid, and I would like to have another Zelda game where we don't have memories again. Of course, they do it to serve the open world and completely open air design, I get that, but I would like to see another game that isn't memory focused. But I would say this game does memories better than Breath of the Wild did, pretty much completely. But more importantly than that, even if you think that the way that Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom tell their stories, even if you think the way they tell their stories is bad, which, I mean, I think that's totally fair. If you think the memories are lame, that's totally fine. The actual content within that story, Tears of the Kingdom is so much more intriguing, once again, because present-day Zelda was sent back to the past. Seeing what was happening to her in the past was just more interesting, at least for me. I don't know, man. I think I think some people expected maybe playable Zelda flashback segments. That would have been nice, or something else to tell that story that isn't through memories. I feel like most people's issue comes from the fact that they are just memories again. But the actual content of the story in Tears of the Kingdom, I think, is really good stuff, man. I know some people have issue with like the timeline and everything, and I don't really want to get into that because the timeline in Zelda, spoiler alert, is stupid. But I think the story is pretty great in Tears of the Kingdom. I just think maybe the way they told it wasn't ideal, but they tell it the same way that Breath of the Wild did. So I don't really know how Breath of the Wild could be viewed above Tears of the Kingdom when it comes to story, just because they tell it the same way, but Breath of the Wild story is just less interesting. And of course, the game itself, I mean, once again, with Breath of the Wild, there are so many things people complain about with that game, and people still complain about a lot of them with Tears of the Kingdom. Enemy variety, people complain about weapons breaking, people complain about dungeons and boss fights. But while those are still issues in Tears of the Kingdom, weapon durability, you can argue the fusing mechanic wasn't as all, it wasn't all it was cracked up to be, sure. That's fair, I guess. And it didn't really change the weapon durability being kind of dumb. I never really had an issue with weapon durability to begin with, but just for the sake of argument. But, like, the dungeons and the boss fights, Tears of the Kingdom clears, dude. I replayed Breath of the Wild, like, the month before Tears of the Kingdom came out, and I was shocked by how uninspired and uneventful the Divine Beasts really are now that we're 6 years removed from that game. I still think, like, they're fine. Like, they get the job done. But the Ganon Blights, I think, are really, really lame boss fights, because they just are, it's just every enemy in the game, but has bigger health bar. You just hit it with whatever weapon you want to do. And while that still applies to a lot of the aspects of the boss fights in Tears of the Kingdom, they did try to design them with elements from past 3D Zelda games, like the Goron boss. I can't remember the name. You know, it has to roll up to the ceiling. You shoot your Goron, whatever spiritual ability, and there's actually like a puzzle element to it. Or fighting the Wind Temple boss. I think it's Colgera or Coldera. Not necessarily puzzle related. You just have to break its ice armor, but there's more to it than just hitting it in the eye with an arrow, like every boss fight in Breath of the Wild. And I don't really want to spoil the final boss here, although I'm sure everybody watching this video has seen it or played it. The final boss in this game is so clearly better than Breath of the Wild. Once again, I know this sounds like I'm just crapping on Breath of the Wild. I do want to make it clear, I love that game so much, but Tears of the Kingdom does pretty much everything just substantially better. Dungeons, boss fights, story. Let's talk about music. I think the music in Tears of the Kingdom is much better, especially during those boss fights. That stuff's incredible. Really the only thing that Breath of the Wild has over Tears of the Kingdom would be that it was just new. And I get that there's always that, like I said, that honeymoon phase, is that desire to prop a game up above what comes after, because Tears of the Kingdom isn't inherently as impressive as Breath of the Wild. But that doesn't mean it's worse. Tears of the Kingdom is a better design, better paced, better story, better gameplay. It's a better game than Breath of the Wild, but because Breath of the Wild already happened, because we already had that preset notion of what an open-air Zelda would be, Tears of the Kingdom, I guess for a lot of people, is just kind of like more of the same. But being more of the same doesn't mean it's bad. And I mean, I can definitely relate to what people are feeling with Tears of the Kingdom a little bit here. I just played through Spider-Man 2, and I was underwhelmed by that game. I do think the story in Spider-Man 2 is worse than Spider-Man 1. I thought Kraven was kind of lame, whatever, right? I'm not going to get into spoilers for that game. But I can still look at Spider-Man 2 and think, okay, well, yeah, I prefer the story in Spider-Man 1, but the gameplay is still better in Spider-Man 2, let's be honest here. Looks better, more, you know, all that stuff, right? It is still a better game, although I maybe prefer Spider-Man 1 because it was that fresh experience. So if that's where they're coming from, if it's just, oh, I like Breath of the Wild because it was more impactful when I played it, that's fine, but that is different than Breath of the Wild being better than Tears of the Kingdom. As someone who plays on all 3 platforms, and for some reason, I don't partake in it, but I see like a lot of console warring stuff in my feed. It feels like Nintendo fans in particular really hate Nintendo and really want to like go back on things that they said, or maybe, I mean, I can't speak for everybody. Not everybody loved Tears of the Kingdom from the start. I know my friend Abram thought Breath of the Wild was better from the very start, but to see people switching up on this, to see people switching up on the lineup this year, I've seen some people, I have gotten comments on my videos saying that 2023 was a bad year for the Switch. You can't make that up. And once again, I know it's all subjective, but there is a level of objectivity like that, like to the Switch lineup being bad in 2023. Come on. Let's take a step back, guys. Come on, it's not a bad year for the Switch. Just because you want the Switch 2 to come out does not make Mario Wonder, Mario RPG, Tears of the Kingdom, Pikmin 4, Future Redeem. That doesn't make these things bad. Just because you're impatient and want a new console, that doesn't make those games bad. It doesn't make the Switch bad in 2023. So I feel like maybe there's just this eagerness to be negative when it comes to Nintendo right now because everybody's just so eager to move on. And to be fair, there were always people that didn't like open air Zelda. I've always gotten comments saying they don't like Breath of the Wild and they prefer the traditional 3D Zelda games. And that's fair. I totally get that. And it is sad for that because I love Wind Waker. I love Skyward Sword. I love Ocarina of Majora's Mask. And I hope that in the future they do more in terms of adapting that more traditional 3D Zelda style with the open air, because trust me guys, they are not going back. Based on sales numbers, it literally makes no sense for them to make another 3D Zelda game like Skyward Sword. There's just no chance. So our best bet would be that they can adopt more of those design philosophies and put them into open air Zelda. And, you know, we get better boss fights, we get better dungeons, we get maybe unique items. I don't really know how that could work in an open world setting. But yeah, if you thought Breath of the Wild wasn't good or it wasn't for you to begin with, that's totally fair. But to the point of this video, that doesn't make Breath of the Wild better than Tears of the Kingdom. Like I said, you can have that nostalgia for Breath of the Wild. I certainly Breath of the Wild was a more impactful experience for me when I first played it. But I can still play Tears of the Kingdom, see all the new stuff they added, see all of the insane stuff they do with the fuse mechanic, and of course the Ultra Hand, and just think like, okay, well this is a more interesting toolkit than Breath of the Wild had. Most of the abilities in Breath of the Wild were kind of lame. Cryonis. I'm looking at you, Cryonis. And they really just amped up the design of shrines and puzzles and the open world itself, the sky islands, the underground, which definitely has some issues there for sure. I'm not going to deny that. But it feels like Breath of the Wild just on steroids. And while I'm not going to sit here and say Tears of the Kingdom is perfect, like I probably have in past videos during that honeymoon phase, I truly don't understand how you could look at Breath of the Wild and say, yep, that's a better video game. A more impactful game, sure. But a better video game? I don't think so. So let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. What do you think of this current backpedaling we're seeing when it comes to Tears of the Kingdom being such a great game that everybody agreed in May when the game released, this is the best Switch game, this is game of the year 2023, to now, at least if you pay attention to the Nintendo community, it seems like a lot of people are going back saying Breath of the Wild is a better game and saying Tears of the Kingdom was a disappointing follow-up. And before I end here, I will say there's also something about the expectations that Tears of the Kingdom had up against it, but people still liked it when it first came out. I can understand 6 years from Breath of the Wild to Tears of the Kingdom. That's a long time. They must have been cooking something crazy for a while, and it is a pretty standard sequel, I guess, in that regard. And perhaps it would have been nice if they did more to expand this open air concept, but that doesn't make it worse. Your expectations being high for this game doesn't mean Tears of the Kingdom is worse than Breath of the Wild. But I digress. I'm rambling. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. What do you think? I mean, I genuinely want to hear some well-written, well-thought-out opinions on why you think Breath of the Wild has a better story or why it's a better game than Tears of the Kingdom. I genuinely want to hear that because as someone who's played both games for hundreds of hours, I love Breath of the Wild, but I just don't see it. So that is going to do it for this video. Of course, subscribe here for more Nintendo Switch news, reviews, coverage, discussion, topics like this pretty much each and every day. And until next time, folks, peace.